From the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome to the fourth week in our 8-week series entitled Journey Through Time, the Historical Human Quest for the Good Life. On program number 4, we're very pleased to discuss the sub-area called the Historical Human Quest for the Development and Survival of the Family. We're most fortunate to have a true expert, someone very distinguished in this field, to discuss the importance of the family, not only in this country, but even globally. I welcome to the program Dr. Diane Medved. Our distinguished guest is a PhD in psychology. In fact, her field is clinical psychology, and she is in private practice. She is an author of 4 major nonfiction books and a nationally known media personality and lecturer. She's been with us here at our institution today, North Idaho College, to speak to our community. She is a 5th-generation Los Angeles native. She was educated at UCLA, where she received a bachelor's degree, a master's, and also her doctoral degree. Dr. Medved's current book, which has received lots of attention around the United States, is entitled The American Family, Discovering the Values That Make Us Strong. This book was co-authored by the former Vice President of the United States, Dan Quayle. After its publication in May 1996, it became the #1 bestseller on the Los Angeles Times list for a period of time. She's also appeared on many national programs, including the Phil Donahue Show, the Oprah Winfrey Show, and the Larry King Show. Dr. Medved, welcome to Idaho and to our program, and we're delighted that you are here.
Thank you so much.
And as always, I'm pleased to have 2 regular panelists to question our distinguished guest today. First of all is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and I shall ask Janelle Burke to commence today's questioning.
Diane, there's so many things that we could talk about this subject. It's going to be fascinating. But let's start with just a brief history. If we're in our quest for the family, let's find out what's happened in the past in order to kind of set the stage. What was the family like around the 1900s, in the early part of this century?
Well, before the turn of the century, the role of the families was mainly to ensure the survival of those who were participating in it. For example, it had to make sure everybody had food and shelter, make sure that the children were educated, make sure that the health was taken care of. And people were, in those days, more often living together multi-generationally. There were families from grandparents and then the adults and the children, sometimes great-grandchildren, all living under one roof and often in a homestead, a special place of earth where people remained for generations, and that was considered part of the identity of the individuals. But now things have changed, of course.
How about another time in history, right prior to World War II? What was the family like?
Well, in those days, there were still multi-generations living together in the United States, but they were also living in neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods, and the cities in particular, gave another sense of identity to people. They had their family, and then the extended family of the people around them, often who were of the same nationality, often who were of the same religion, and they would reinforce each other, so the extended family became even further extended and reinforced, and the values were now getting into the industrialized age, where people weren't just concerned with their survival as much as they were concerned with getting their consumerism together. People were getting ready for the war, and consumerism was gearing up. Homes were getting electricity, they were getting telephones, they were becoming part of the new age of electronics that we have now.
But the World War II changed things. And so what happened after the war to the American family?
Well, the baby boom was a big factor with the American family. One of the programs in the Popcorn Forum included Rosie the Riveter, who was portrayed, and there were a lot of women who changed because they entered the workforce temporarily, but they returned still maintaining the value that family was the most important, that raising children was important, that giving love and receiving love was important. And the economy went from building airplanes and building bombers and building all kinds of things for war, turning that around to the home, building suburbs, building washing machines, building all kinds of appliances, and getting people set up for what we consider the happy days of the 1950s.
And then women began to enter the workforce, and they began to have control over the reproductive system, and that was another change, I'm sure, to the American family.
Well, I think there was a really big change in terms of philosophy. People went from familialism, where the family, the extended family, was very important to them, to individualism, where the individual, you know, the me decade, that was a big favorite in the 1970s. Robert Ringer coined that term. And it was something where people became selfish. And rather than saying, here are some objective barometers as to whether or not the family is succeeding, is the family together? Is the husband bringing in money? Are the children going to school? These objective barometers, suddenly everything turned topsy-turvy, where the baby boomers said, hey, how I feel is going to be the barometer of how successful my family is. And if it's not feeling good, forget it, we'll toss it out. So the divorce rate started to rise dramatically, and people were throwing away marriages because there were no outside criteria. All of a sudden, what you think is the end. Psychology took off like a shot, enriching many of us psychologists and making sure that there were many more divorces and many more displaced children along the way.
Steve Shink.
Dr. Medved, I'm going to cut right to the chase, and families are a hot topic today. Maybe some of the information that we get is misleading. Could you give us a sort of a brief state of the family message?
Well, I will say that there's a lot of misleading evidence that the family's going to pot. And luckily, the happy family is not a thing of the past. Families are surviving and they're strong. The majority of those in the United States consider themselves happy and content. Poll after poll shows that. They think their family life is great, but when you ask them, what is the state of the family in the United States? They all say, oh, it's horrible, it's going to hell in a handbasket, it's just awful. Why? There's a discrepancy between people's personal experience and what the media are reporting. And that, I think, is a crime. For example, the myth of the 50% divorce rate. So many people take for granted that if there's a 50% divorce rate. There is nothing worse than that, because it gives people permission to throw away their marriages. They think, oh, it's a coin toss. When if you look at the statistical data collected by the Census Bureau, how much more reliable can you get? You find out that only 20% of ever married adults get divorced. Only 20%. That's 1 out of 5 people. Now, we're not comparing marriages, we're talking about people. But if you look around you and you say, gee, only 1 out of 5 people ever gets divorced, that's a lot more pressure to try and work out your problems rather than just throw away the marriage.
We were talking before the show started, and you mentioned another interesting and often misrepresented statistic, and that is the number of children with single-parent families. Could you clear that up for us, too, please?
Well, unfortunately, we hear about so many people in single-parent families because there is a movement, a politically correct movement, to try and legitimize every form of the family as equally good. The truth is that still, the two-parent family is alive and well, and that 72% of children under 18 are living in a two-parent home. Well, that certainly encourages us, because if you think that the divorce is rampant and single-parent families are the norm, then you're certainly not going to be motivated to try and save your marriage. And you're certainly not going to be motivated to reassure your child that, yes, your marriage can survive and you're not unusual.
Tony, I'm taking up more than my share of time, but I need to follow up if I can. As a psychologist, how important is that motivation, that desire to make the marriage and the family work to a successful?
Oh, you know very well that motivation is everything. You know that old joke about psychologists. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb?
No, I didn't know that joke.
You don't know it?
I don't know it.
Here it goes. 1, but the light bulb has to want to change. It's motivation. We're back to motivation. You can't make any progress with anything unless you have motivation. And to motivate people by saying, hey, the family's working. Hey, you're not unusual. Yes, your values are correct, and the society at large supports you. That's a powerful motivator to work through problems.
And I'm sorry, but one more quick one. Are there other key predictors in your studies of successful versus unsuccessful marriages?
Well, actually, there's quite a few. In terms of marriages, definitely religious commitment. When the couple shares values that are similar and parallel, they have goals that are similar. They don't have expectations that are apart. One of the biggest problems that I find in problem marriages is that one has an expectation of behavior on the other person that is conflicting with that other person's. For example, the mother expects that her husband's going to be late, and so he should be calling home. Expectation. The husband says, well, I'm going to be late, but it's only 10 minutes, so I don't really have to call home. And they conflict. And when people can clarify things via good communication, and that may mean realizing men are from Mars and women are from Venus, but if you can clarify things and keep your expectations in sync, then you're going to have a lot less problems.
Thank you. And thank you, Tony, for indulging me.
Oh, that's my pleasure. Dr. Medved introduced you by indicating that your latest book is called The American Family. discovering the values that make us strong. I was very impressed with your comments earlier today about that research. First of all, I would tell viewers who are not familiar with what you did that I believe you surveyed over 2,000 families, but then also you had case studies where you were looking at it in great depth. And you came away with 4 or 5, I think, really major, significant findings. I believe you said they were surprising in some ways, but I think what you really have found in this process is the secret of the family that is successful, and I want you to share that with the viewers.
Okay, there are quite a few things that we found successful families across geography, across political belief, across religions have in common. And these are things that people can take home and use in their families right now. For example, the most successful families had a sense of place. They felt rooted to where they lived. They'd often lived in the same place since childhood of one of the parents. They had some connection to it either by an occupation. We had a family in Hawaii who made their living via a surfboard company. Connection. We had a family in Virginia who ran a bed and breakfast based on their land, the recreational possibilities of their land. We had a family in East LA who had lived their second generation, another one in Indianapolis where the woman had lived in the same street since she was born. She was a middle-ager. And then we had a family in Chicago, a black family in the worst part of the city, in the ghetto. What had they done? Because they had been rooted in that 2-block section, and they were the newest members of that community, having been there only 23 years, they had become like an extended family. And they censured each other's kids when they needed to, and they watched out for each other's kids when they needed to. And they, in fact, when I came down the street to do the interview with the family in that block in Chicago, I saw about 10 faces peering out the window trying to find out who was the stranger driving down the street very slowly. Because they cared for each other. They were able to do that. And the sense of place was crucial. In our society where we live in one place for only 4.5 years on average, I think it would be wise for us to evaluate our changes of jobs, our desires for a bigger and better house, based on the fact that we may be destroying one of the most important saviors of the family. So a sense of place is crucial. Another one is the value of the dollar. Most of the people that I talk to went against the popular culture, went against the media, who are saying, consider the value of a dollar in terms of what it can buy. Consider how much you can buy of these great jeans or these wonderful Nike tennis shoes or this great Lexus car. Most people are sort of trained into consumerism by the media. But these families fought that and taught their children the value of a dollar in terms of what it took to make it. They all had responsibilities. They all had jobs to do in the house. They didn't get money for nothing. And the parents impressed upon them through their own myths, their own tales, their own experiences, all the things that it took to take them to where they were. They may have been very successful at that point in time, but they never let their children forget all the effort that went into it. Did you have another question?
No, I just want you to go on.
There's a couple more.
Yes, please.
Okay, another one is that they had an idea of respect for elders, that the children would rise when elders would enter the room. They wouldn't think to call an adult by a first name. And it's appalling to me that in many schools, even public schools sometimes, teachers are called by their first names. And I think that's breaking down the idea that children are in a position of learning in order to achieve and earn the respect that they then give elders. And it tears apart families when children are know-it-all, child knows best. And I think we have to reinstate the idea of respect for elders in our society. And another one that's very fundamental is that each family incorporated gratitude and optimism in their everyday behavior without even thinking about it. The idea of being self-sacrificing was not a negative to them. In fact, they wouldn't call it self-sacrificing. They call it common courtesy. They call it the natural way that you behave with people around you, to go over and mow their lawn, to drop you off somewhere at the store, to come help you with the baby when you need help. They would volunteer to help people in their family out of love, out of concern, out of expecting that that's something that you do for people in your family. And nowadays, we've torn that apart in too many homes and found children who say, well, what'll you give me if I mow the lawn? What'll you give me? And having expectations that are, frankly, snotty and unfair and tearing apart the fabric of our society.
Also a footnote that you gave that I would like to give you the opportunity to do again, although it's risky with us being on television, but you said also that sometimes children watch too much TV or families watch too much TV.
Well,
with the exception of this program, of course.
Oh, you can't watch too much of this program. No. With that exception, I will say that the families that were most successful had a natural desire to curb their TV. They didn't want to watch TV, preferring instead to do things together, to go on family field trips. The family in Indianapolis, for example, they didn't have a lot of money. They couldn't go out bowling even. They couldn't even go to McDonald's. They were so poor. So how did they spend their time? Not with the TV on. They'd sit around the dining room table and play cards. They'd play cards with each other and laugh and share their days and have dinner together. They wanted to bind together because that for them was much more pleasurable than the typical kinds of entertainment that we're finding now and that are also pushed by the media and being the media. Nowadays you see kids sitting in front of their personal computers or their video games or in front of the TV or renting a video. They're doing these things that are channeling their energies not into other people but into machines. Even communication has broken down between friends. You send an email. You don't even pick up the phone and hear their voice. You send them an email. Well, I mean, it's good for their literary skills, but it's not very good for cementing the kind of bond that can only be cemented by physical contact, by hugging somebody, by seeing a smile, by saying thank you. And that's what we have to reinstate.
I really appreciate that. That was very helpful.
Thank you.
Janelle Berg.
One of the things that you have said is that you are opposed to divorce, and you've given some reasons that you would be opposed to divorce. Can you tell us what those reasons are, and what happens to a family when there's divorce in the family?
You've asked me 3 questions because I have to give you a caveat first, and that is I'm not opposed to divorce in every single situation. There are a few unfortunate situations where divorce is necessary, such as when there's an alcoholic in the family who doesn't want to treat it at all. If there's child abuse, spousal abuse, and the person doesn't want to deal with that either. Or sometimes, there's drug abuse. There are some unfortunate cases where divorce is the only answer, and I do exclude those. However, I would say that in our society, we take divorce now far too casually. We consider it just another option, as good as staying married. And because we've gotten into this idea that my own feelings are the barometer, and my own feelings, gee, it doesn't feel good to you? Why are you staying in there with that guy? Get out! And every single friend would come forward, trying to be a good friend, of course, and say, why are you taking that? Get out! Well, that is not a very nice thing to do in the long run. Because in the old days, when we used to live in these multi-generational families, 2 good things happened. One was we learned by watching, by observing our elders, how to solve problems, how to deal with conflicts. And secondarily, if an elder was observing you behaving miserably, as we're all wont to do occasionally, or selfishly or stubbornly, the elder might intervene and say, the way to solve this problem is to go in the other room for 15 minutes, change your hairdo, and then come out and sit in that corner, and when he sees you and he's ready, he'll come around. So they could learn in 2 different ways, by observation and by direct inculcation. We don't have that anymore. We don't see older people leading long-term successful marriages, and that's a big problem. Nobody knows how to behave. A large part of what I do in my practice working with couples is giving husband lessons and wife lessons. And divorce is often a result of just people being ignorant, and I find it disgusting. Plus, there's another thing, and that is that there are so many reasons that are given for divorce that are really not legitimate. And one of the things I do in my book, The Case Against Divorce, is to blow holes in most of the reasons people give. For example, we've grown apart. Well, you hear somebody say, I'm getting a divorce, we've grown apart. Most people just say, oh, that's too bad. But what you should do is shake them by the shoulder and say, what do you mean you've grown apart? What you do with your time and your interests is your choice. It's your choice. You've grown apart. You chose to grow apart. You could choose to turn around and grow together. But people don't do that. They just accept it. Oh, divorce is just another option. I don't want to get involved. But the truth is that really that many of these excuses, and I consider them excuses, are merely just justifications of selfishness. And there's so many cases where if they were told the other side, if they were shown that there's an alternative, if they were asked to reason it through really logically and not emotionally, people would turn around and want to work on their marriages. But for most people, it's too hard. Working through a problem is a lot harder than turning your back on it and going out the door. And the problem is that those who do turn their backs on it get support from friends, from relatives, from the courts, from the law profession. There's a lot of reasons why people continue through the door when really they don't have to.
Dr. Medved, I was all set to ask a different series of questions, and then I heard the comment about husband and wives, or lessons for husband and wives, let me put it that way, and I can't resist. Give me some examples of those lessons, if you would, please.
Well, part of it is in understanding the differences between men and women. This is the Freudian question, what do women want? He's scratching his head. Well, the truth is that women tell you what they want, and that's one of their capabilities, is that they want to communicate what's going on internally in their emotional lives. Men typically don't. For men, no, they can certainly learn, But it's often a lot harder for men. It isn't a natural inclination for them to want to communicate. And one time I overheard my dear husband, Michael Medved, doing a phone interview with somebody from a newspaper who had apparently asked him, what is it that you do to keep your marriage strong? And he said, force yourself to talk. Force yourself to talk. And if men understand what is important to women, they want to be let in. They want to know what's going on with you. And what's important to women is to feel that they're bound to you, that they're binding with you, that you're in this enterprise of love and marriage together, that you're raising your children together. What is it that men want? Men want support. Men want to come home and see somebody there who's not going to nag them, who's not going to complain to them, who's going to be eagerly awaiting them and loving to them and giving them the support and isn't going to try and weasel that communication out of them. It should be for each of the two partners to give that freely and set that as an interior goal. Say, I want to go home and talk to her and I'm going to work on that, not for her to pull it out with pliers. And for her at the same time to say, now what does he want? He wants to come home to a smiling wife and a clean house and maybe some food. It could be takeout. It's okay. But maybe something that shows that I'm thinking of him, that I'm caring for him. And for me to say to him, well, gee, maybe you'd like a back rub, or run the water in the tub for him. And it doesn't matter if he gets in the tub and uses it. It's the gesture. It's that he feels home. Ah, that's the place I want to be. Home, that's the place I come to when I can get my shoulders rubbed. And that will make you a magnet for him. So those are just a couple of the husband-wife. I mean, I could go on for weeks.
If I may, I'll move real quickly into my other question, and maybe Tony would like to follow up on this. We've been talking about things that are pretty non-controversial, really. I mean, I think most people would agree that marriage is better than divorce, that two parents are better than one for raising children. What is your feeling about the appropriate role of institutions? I think of government, I think of the courts, I think of the churches in, well, encouraging is easy too, so I'll get it more controversial, in limiting the ability of husbands and wives to quickly end their supposed problems with divorce. How far would you go in that direction of making divorce more difficult for people?
Well, there are a lot of questions, and I know many different states have looked at the idea of having fault divorce reinstated. And I think that it should be an option.
As opposed to no-fault divorce?
I think no-fault should continue to be an option, especially in cases where there are no children and where there's no dispute over property. But at the same time, because I think there are two different classes of marriage, those that have children involved, young children in particular, and those that don't. And there is a big impact on children and the ripple effect when there are children involved. When it's just two adults, it is much simpler. Now, it's not good. And certainly, there's a Jewish tradition that the altar in heaven, the Mizbeach, weeps tears every time there's a divorce. But at the same time, I think there can be two classes. So maybe no fault would be appropriate for some cases. Fault divorce might be appropriate in cases where one partner really wants to save the marriage, but the other one refuses to cooperate. And in those cases, divorce has almost become a unilateral decision. If one partner wants out, then the other one's stuck. The other partner can't save the marriage single-handedly. But I think at least that person who wants to work it out, who wants to stick it through, who wants to give it the attention, and who feels a commitment for life should have some sort of recourse, some sort of adjustment that lets the world and that person feel that at least those values are better values and should be rewarded. So in terms of making divorce more difficult, there's another thing that I think is very important, and that is changing the attitude of people around you. I think friends can often encourage divorce. When a woman has an argument with her husband and she goes over to her girlfriend's house and the girlfriend says, oh, dear, dear, he's such a rat. You stay here on my couch. I'll make you, how could you stand him? How can you go back to him? What is this friend doing? She thinks she's being nice and comforting a friend, but she's teaching and telling her friend that she's an idiot if she goes back. Don't you dare, be that guy. Even though you love him, don't trust those instincts that you love him. Stay here with me. I'll give you a safe haven. That's wrong. We have to look at the attitudes of those around us critically, not uncritically, and decide, is this really a good attitude for me, or is it an attitude that's contrary to everything that I believed when I entered into this marriage? And you can see this in all kinds of forces, media in particular. I mean, you go to the checkout counter of a market, you see a tabloid sitting there, and it talks about some actor or actress who's getting their 5th or 6th divorce like it's nothing. This has an impact. Not only do concrete things like newspapers and soft beds in friends' homes have consequences, but ideas have consequences. Thinking certain ways, you can control your own thoughts and put yourself in a mindset that divorce is not an option, that marriage is worth fighting for, and that there's more involved here than just my momentary feelings, that maybe there could even be something like God, like community, like other people who are going to be heard, grandparents who lose contact with grandchildren. There's more to consider here than just the selfishness of the me generation and the me decade.
Dr. Medved, you indicated today, too, something else that was really, really interesting, and it certainly affects the family as well as it does individuals in life in general. You indicate there are other problems in society, crime, drugs, and all, but you don't think that's the number one problem in the country. Would you identify that and then explain to us why that affects families and also the breakup of families?
Why these other problems affect families?
You indicated that you thought the number one problem in America today was whining.
Well, I say no. The other things like crime, like school dropouts, like teenage pregnancy, they're all serious problems. Yeah. They're important problems, and they definitely deserve addressing, and they should be addressed. But I will say that a lot of it could be addressed if we address what I consider to be the number one problem today that affects everybody, and that is whining. W-H-I-N-E, whining, complaining, or as we say, kvetching about everything. People do that, and what does it do? It makes them look at the world through sour, pickle-colored glasses. And what does that do? Well, that even changes the quality of your interaction with the person who is taking your money at the gas station. It changes the quality of your interaction with your children when you get up in the morning. It changes the quality of interaction with everyone around you, bringing down the affect in our society, diminishing optimism, diminishing gratitude, which is the antidote to pessimism, is gratitude. And what we need, well, as we say, more gratitude, less attitude in this culture. And I think if we purposefully write ourselves Post-it notes, thanks to say thank you to so-and-so, remind ourselves that we have control over those emotions. And I think that we can improve the climate of not only our own homes, but our communities, our states, our country at large, and make a big difference in the world.
That's what you found too in those families that were that I consider very special in their success. Mm-hmm. That they were one of your components you found was that they were very supportive of one another. They were expressing this.
They expressed their love toward one another. They touched each other. They did things for each other, and they weren't shy about saying, "I'm the luckiest person in the world." Waking up in the morning and turning around to that spouse or to that child and say, "Boy, I'm lucky that I got you."
On that very positive note, we have to bring the program to conclusion. On behalf of the panel and the staff, Dr. Diane Medved, we thank you for being with us. We've very much enjoyed this time with you.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have completed program number 4 of an 8-week series entitled Journey Through Time, The Historical Human Quest for the Good Life. And as you know, in this program today, we were addressing the development and survival of the family. I would like to invite you to be with us again next week, and we're going to talk about the historical quest for economic security. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.